Welcome back to Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. I'm Jack Llewellyn. We have a special presentation today. Two reasons. The good is we have Leo Silva, retired DEA agent, who has written a great new book on Los Zetas that we're going to talk about. So Leo's with us. That's the good news. The bad news is I'm also recording this video-wise, so you get to see both of us. So we'll put it up on a couple of different formats. But let's talk to Leo. So as I say, Leo is a retired DEA agent. He has written a book called Reign of Terror, and you can see parts of the book cover from behind him. Great book talking about Los Zetas. I've read almost all of it. And so we're going to chat for a little bit about Leo, his career, his book, and Los Zetas. And so with that, welcome, Leo.
Well, I'm happy to be here, Jack. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. I've written a couple of reviews of your book. As I say, I haven't quite finished all of it, but came close, and I loved it. So I'm excited to have those listening learn a little bit more about it. But why don't we start at the very beginning and kind of maybe you can tell us how it is that you came to be in the DEA.
Well, it's kind of a funny story. I mean, I didn't start college with the intention of becoming a DEA agent or joining the DEA. My major in college was to be an English teacher. I was studying English literature, and that was my goal. I wanted to become an English teacher and help kids from my community that did not have English as a primary language, so it was hard for them to function in the community. So my goal was to help some of these kids that couldn't speak English at all, and try to help them integrate into our society. So that was my goal. Well, it turns out that my mom was working in a law firm back in those days when I was going into college as a freshman. And one of her coworkers was married to a DEA agent, a guy by the name of Tony Tamayo. And he had been on the job quite a while already. And, moms brag about their kids, so she kept telling her coworker, "Oh, Leo this, Leo that," and in turn, this lady would tell her husband. And he took an interest in me, and he started recruiting me towards, a career in the DEA. And the more I looked into it and saw it, I became interested. And I decided to change my career path in my junior year. Actually, I didn't change my major because I was too far along already. I still got my degree as an English major on my bachelor's, and but I changed my path. I said, well, I don't want to be a teacher anymore. I'm going to try to become a DEA agent, and if I don't make it, well, I can always fall back on my degree and go back to teaching. So that's what happened, and I applied for the DEA, and it was a long process, man. It took about a year before I was actually hired. And then I went to the academy and went through 16 weeks of brutal mental and physical training, and prepares you kind of for what's going to happen in the field, and there's no amount of training that's going to prepare you for what you face in the field. I mean, it'll get you semi-prepared mentally, but once you're out there, it's a different ballgame.
I can imagine. I bet the list of DEA agents who have their English as their major is not a long list.
In my experience, in 28 years, I never met a single one. just me.
Hey, before we do this drug bust, can I tell you some hidden meanings of Huck Finn? Some English literature. So where did you start off in the DEA?
When I first got hired, I hired out of the office of Brownsville. Then I went to the academy, Brownsville, Texas, which is right on the border. Went to the academy, and in the 80s, I started on in 1987. And it's a couple of years after the Camarena incident, the Enrique Camarena kidnapping.
I've got him right behind my...
Yeah, I see it.
Yep.
And then in 1986, here in McAllen, Texas, one of our agents was killed in an undercover drug bust, William Ramos.
Mm-hmm.
So it was there was some pretty dark times for the DEA in that era. And when I started, Agent Ramos had gotten killed, and another agent, Agent Stasny in Atlanta, had gotten killed also, both in undercover uh, drug deals. So, with that, I went into the academy and training, and I was assigned to McAllen, Texas. In those days, uh, the task force, the Gulf Coast Task Force in Florida, was doing an outstanding job with deterring the influx of cocaine and marijuana and these other drugs into South Florida from the Colombian cartels. So the Colombians started reshifting their distribution routes and their transportation routes, and they started using Mexico. Well, Mexico has this wide area of border. You have Texas, you have New Mexico, you have Arizona and California, all these states that run along the border of Mexico. So the Colombians and the Mexicans at the time started, they united, they allied forces, and they started redistributing their drugs through Mexico. So at the time, DEA was looking for Hispanic agents, because there was a huge demand for them. Because first of all, we needed them for undercover. When there were wiretaps going on, they needed us to translate what some of these guys were saying because nobody knew what they were saying. And nowadays, there's contract companies that you can hire and get all these Spanish speakers, and they do it for you. But back in those days, us, the agents, had to do it. There was nobody that we could hire. We did it ourselves. Translations, transcriptions, all that stuff. So Hispanic agents were in big demand. And I was hired, and I was sent to the border, McAllen, Texas, where all the action was being redistributed.
So at that time, who were the main players on the Mexican side of the fence or the border?
When I got here, the main player, and he was the leader of the Gulf cartel at the time, was Juan Garcia Abrego. He was it. I mean, he was the guy, man, and he was in charge of the whole border here. And then as you went further up west, you had the Carrillo Fuentes and those guys, but here it was Juan Garcia Abrego, and he was the man. And he was, I would say, he was. People talk and they have all these movies about how El Chapo started the cocaine trade and from Mexico into the United, and the Colombians into the United States. It wasn't him. It was Juan Garcia Abrego. He's the one that started these connections with the Colombian cartels. And we saw it at the time, in the 80s. Even before I got on the job in 87, there was these huge cocaine busts that we didn't see before here on the border.
Mm.
On the border, back in the 80s, it was heroin and marijuana. And once in a while, you'd get, some cocaine, but not in huge quantities. I'm not, I'm talking back in those days, you seize a kilo or two, man, you're a hero. All of a sudden, we started seeing, 100 kilos, 200 kilos. And it was crazy. So he was the man, and he was the one that pioneered the cocaine trade from Colombia to Mexico to the United States. And I really don't, I'll take issue with anybody who disagrees with that, because I was there, I saw it,
Yeah, I always say El Chapo had a great PR department or something because he gets credited with almost everything.
Right. But Juan Garcia Abrego, he was a businessman, and he was all about making money and how to multiply his assets. So he was smart. He was a businessman, and he wasn't in the business of kidnapping and killing people, and so just for the sake of doing it. He unless it was a way to make money, that's what he was focused on. So, as a drug trafficker, he was also a businessman.
And then, and a cup too. I love it.
Yes.
I'm going to crib all of your marketing efforts when mine. So then, over time, let's talk. Kind of move into kind of how the Zetas started.
Right.
So they morphed within and then outside of the Gulf Cartel, as I understand it. You want to expand upon that?
So when Juan Garcia Abrego was captured, he was captured by, federal police in Mexico, along with DEA's intelligence. He was captured. Osiel Cárdenas Guillen takes over the Gulf Cartel, and he is Juan Garcia Abrego's nephew. Now, Osiel Cárdenas Guillen was a different animal. He was very paranoid. He was a cocaine user. He was addicted to cocaine. So he was hyper paranoid. And he had good reason to be, because he killed a lot of people, and they called him the friend killer, Matamigos.
Mm-hmm.
So he was always looking over his shoulder, because he thought somebody was going to come back and get revenge on some of these killings that he's ordered or taken place. And so he wanted extra security, and he was the one that devised the idea or the concept of hiring former special forces guys as his security detail. So he hires Arturo Guzman de Sena, who was former special forces, Mexican special forces, and de Sena goes on and recruits all these other guys that were active, and he just lured them from the army into the Zetas because there was more money involved. Right. The army wasn't
not too hard,
right? So he recruited all these guys, former special forces, highly trained individuals, guys trained in explosives, sniper, counterintelligence, you name it, special forces. This was Osiel Cárdenas Guillen's security detail. That's how they started out. Now, as Osiel started going downhill with his addictions and everybody in the world was after him, then he gets captured. And the leadership in the Gulf Cartel starts deteriorating a little bit. You had El Cos, you had El Goyo, who was another drug addict, and then you had Tony Tormenta, who was Osiel Cárdenas' brother. And the leadership quality there just kind of went downhill, right? So the Zetas saw it as an opportunity to take over their operations. I mean, here you have these guys, this group of special forces guys, and who does the Gulf Cartel have? No one. I mean, they were the detail, man. They were the security detail. So they started gaining power. They saw an opportunity and said, "Hey, we don't need these guys." So there was a breakup, and then there was a war. And in the middle of this war, well, it was the ground zero was Monterrey, Nuevo León. That's where the war started taking place, in Monterrey, Nuevo León, and Tamaulipas. And I don't know if you call it bad luck or good luck, but we happened to be there when this war broke out. So that's how the Zetas came to power. They saw the opportunity, and they're very opportunistic. They see an opportunity to make money, they're going to take it. And so
I'll circle back to the Zetas, but that's one thing I've talked about a lot on this podcast is the idea that, if, let's just say magically CJNG went away tomorrow, there's a vacuum there. Somebody's going to fill that vacuum.
Somebody is. Absolutely.
And maybe not of the same caliber, maybe of more caliber, but that's kind of what happened. You all of a sudden there's a power gap or a leadership gap, and that, again, somebody's going to fill that vacuum, and the Zetas were it.
They were it, and they did it. They did it, and they ran with it. They expanded. They went into Central America, took over operations there, so that they could again make more money. If they were there in control in Central America, they didn't need people from Guatemala or Honduras to help them, because they were in control. So it's just one less person on the chain that you have to pay. So I mean, these guys they were pretty smart themselves, and they operated like a corporation. So they had their accountants and people that kept track of every single penny that they made and spent.
So let's talk about kind of the Zetas as they rise up, because I think in the U.S. most of us, if we think of Zetas, what we think of as is the ultra violent group. And that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. And that's valuable. And obviously we'll talk about that. But as you started to allude to, there was real substance behind them too, as far as traffickers and a cartel and a real organization founded on that. They were military people. They were founded on that military principle. So to what extent were they successful, not just in their violent terms, but in terms of trafficking and becoming a dominant player in the trafficking world itself?
They were very successful. I mean, we go back to Juan Garcia Abrego. Like I said, he was a drug trafficker. He trafficked in marijuana, cocaine, and maybe some human smuggling. But the Zetas, they took it beyond that. They went into kidnappings, extortions, another way to generate money. I have stories of people going to flea markets, indoor flea markets there in Monterrey, and if they're selling liquor, like whiskey or whatever, and they don't have the little Zeta sticker logo on that bottle, with the Zeta's approval, then their little store is going to get torn down or burned or something, because the Zetas had control of everything, even the bootleg liquor sales and all that. They controlled everything. Prostitution, kidnappings, extortions. They just found a way to make more money besides drug trafficking and human smuggling. So it was very lucrative for them. I mean, especially in Monterrey, you have San Pedro, Garza Garcia, Nuevo León, which is per capita the richest city in all of Latin America, not just Mexico. There's more millionaires there in San Pedro, Garza Garcia than in anywhere else in Latin America. So they're opportunistic. They see these people that have all these assets and money. Well, I'm going to kidnap your kid, and you're going to pay me $5 million, or else we're going to get him back in pieces. And people would pay. I've read about cases and actually met with people that paid these large ransoms. Sometimes they paid the ransom, and their loved one would not come back. They'd never see him again. They'd just kill him. So, yeah, they took it beyond just drug trafficking, and they made a lot of money.
What was the role of the Mexican government, Mexican law / military apparatus at that time, especially as to the Zetas, kind of as they're ascending?
Well, there was one particular incident that kind of set them off, and before I get into it, they knew of them. Were they proactive in doing anything against them? No, they really weren't until this incident happened, and I'm going to talk about it. In October of 2008, the Zetas decided to launch a couple of grenades at the U.S. consulate in Monterrey. One exploded and did some damage to the front of the building, and two of them didn't. One was a dud, and one they forgot to pull the pin. So they must have been too nervous and didn't pull the pin on the grenades. Anyway, that incident right there started everything. I mean, U.S. law enforcement became a lot more proactive in going after them with our federal counterparts at the time. And we conducted a couple of operations on a guy named El Canicon, where we ended up seizing like 10 tons of marijuana at a warehouse of his. After that operation, we went to a safe house of his, where this huge shootout ensued. He escapes the shootout, drives down the main road in Monterrey, and then takes a couple of shots at the U.S. consulate again. So shortly after that incident, he finds out, he learns that the military, the Sedena, was involved in the operation. So he wants to get revenge on Sedena. So Sedena has a military base there in Monterrey on the outskirts. And there's a taxi base close to the military. And some of these guys, when they go on leave, well, they get a taxi to go downtown or go see their girlfriend or whatever, go visit their family. Well, these taxis, once these guys got in the car, they would take him straight to El Canicon. And, needless to say, they were tortured and brutally murdered. He killed 9 soldiers, which is called in Sedena circles, it's called Octubre Negro, Black October, and I talk about it in the book. So when that happened, when they killed those 9 soldiers, I'm talking, they slit their throats to the point where they were almost decapitated. All young guys, maybe the oldest one was maybe 24, 25. So then the military, Sedena, was pissed. You just killed 9 of my guys, and now it's on, man. So that's when they started getting proactive in going after these guys, and that was a tactical error on behalf of the Zetas of, first of all, attacking the U.S. consulate. You're pretty much attacking the U.S. government, which is, it's fatal. It's a fatal mistake.
Well, it's interesting because you could say the same thing about the Camarena case. At what point do you get it into your head that you're so powerful that you can kidnap a DEA agent,
right?
Interrogate him brutally, murder him whether you intended to or not, and there's not going to be enormous blowback? Same idea. You're gonna throw grenades at the U.S. embassy and assume that nothing's going to happen. These people who, bad people can be smart too, and as you say, they were very good at making money. They were military people, and then do something that you're just, when you look back on it and you go, who thought that was a good idea?
Right, exactly. And I'll go back even a little further. When Ociel was in charge, two agents from Monterrey at the time, before I got there, a DEA agent and FBI agent, they were almost kidnapped there in Matamoros by Ociel and his cohorts. And again, that started another storm, a firestorm back then. So it's all these little incidents.
Yeah, can you tell us more about that incident, because you write about it in your book, and that was the first chapter I read. And I just think it's a fascinating story.
Right. Well, our agents, it was again, at the time Ociel was a priority. So they had some good information. They had actually a very good informant that was providing them information. And this informant was going to point out a couple of houses that Ociel was frequenting. So they took a trip down to Matamoros. And they go down this one road. And lo and behold, there's Ociel Carnas Guillen with a couple of other guys. And when they see him, they stop him and they surround their car. And at gunpoint. And one of the agents is actually a very good friend of mine. The DEA agent is a very good friend of mine. And they start trying to talk their way out of it. Hey, you don't want another Camarena incident, man, because you know what's going to happen. So it's best that you just let us go, because they were going to kill him. So you give us the informant in the back seat and everything will be okay. You guys can leave, but, you have to give him to us. And they said no, and they talked away. I guess something went through Ociel's brain, something registered. He said, well, okay, leave, but don't come back. But still, I mean, they still mess with a DEA agent and an FBI agent. And there was a big firestorm back then after that. And then if Ociel had any heat on him at that point, the heat just got hotter, because of that incident. So,
right.
So you have the Camarena incident, the kidnapping, this incident of Matamoros, and now they decide to launch a couple of grenades at the U.S. consulate in Monterrey. And then, not only that, they kill 9 Sedena soldiers. Brutally.
They weren't flying under the radar anymore.
No. So, once you piss off, Sedena, you're done, man. I mean, it's just a matter of time. So that was pretty much, I would say, the beginning of the end for these guys, because Sedena was never going to let up. Neither were we, and it was just a big a domino effect, I would call it, because we just never let up after that.
So when did you actually get involved directly in investigating the Zetas?
When I first got there, I reported officially in 2008, but I had already been going there and doing some temporary duty sessions in 2007. And in 2007, my boss at the time calls me up to Mexico City and he tells me, Leo, this guy is pretty much our priority right now. And he was talking about Miguel Treviño, the number two in command of the Zetas at the time. Because at the time, one of our real close counterparts, who was in charge of one of our vetted units, special investigations unit, trained by DEA, was killed. They assassinated him, and it was Treviño. So my boss says, we're gonna, this is your priority, Leo. When you get to Monterrey, this is what I want you to focus on. So I had my marching orders. I get there in 2008, and we start developing intelligence little by little, and at the time we were interviewing people, and some of the stories we heard were just crazy. I mean, we're like, this is real. And if people read the book, and I said this in another show, but people are going to read the book and they're going to say, this can't be real. This is just, the author making this stuff up. I'm not making it up, man. It's real. We interviewed a witness who was in a torture house that belonged to El Canicon, who was the guy that launched the grenades at the consulate. And I describe it in vivid detail, what he told us. And when he was telling us this, we were just, you could hear a pin drop, man, because we just couldn't believe it. But this is the extent that these guys went to make a point and to make your family pay the ransom or whatever. So, I mean, it was crazy. So we started developing all this intelligence and interviewing people that had actually been kidnapped or whatever, been extorted by the Zetas. And at the time, as you build up this intelligence, you get some information that's actually viable and you can conduct an operation. So after the consulate incident, we had several viable targets that we had. And now that Sedena was on board with us, because after the 9 soldiers were murdered, they called us and they wanted our help as far as providing intelligence. So we hooked up and we became allies. And then after that, it was game on, with us and Sedena against Zetas. That's how it happened.
One of the things that I've really liked about your book, amongst other things, you see it a little bit in shows like Narcos Mexico, but not nearly to the degree that it's in your book. Is the element of just kind of the day-to-day legwork that goes into creating a case, and as you said, allowing you to do operations, and the idea that it's a lot of little things, right, that all get put together and stuff. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of talk about from the insider's perspective. And that's the other thing, folks. If you want to read a book that puts you in the mind of the people who are doing the job, Leo does a great job of that. And even the ones that don't involve him, the incident in Monterrey, with them being stopped, you can feel yourself there. But I'm just wondering if you can talk to people who aren't in law enforcement. How do you go about, okay, you're charged with going after the Zetas. What the hell does that mean, and what do you do?
Okay, so I mean, as a young agent, I was blessed and very fortunate to have some very knowledgeable mentors. A guy named Mario Alvarez, who was my mentor, and he taught me all there was to know about undercover work. And as a young agent, I did a lot of undercover work. When I started out. And my other mentor, I would say, and I dedicate this book to both of them, was a guy named Bobby Brightwell. And Bobby taught me uh, not the undercover part, but the writing part. And this is how you get a search warrant. This is how you charge this guy with conspiracy. He taught me more about how you can use the law to go ahead and charge these guys. More of the brainy side of law enforcement, right? And I just was so fortunate to have these two guys in the same group with me, man. So whenever I was tired of the brainy stuff and the reading and all that stuff, and Mario would come, hey, let's go do a heroin deal. All right, go, let's go, right? So Bobby's lessons taught me, you got to start from somewhere, and you just got to learn as much as you can about your target, no matter who it is. I mean, big or how small. And the more you know, the better it will be for you as an investigator. And I always took those lessons with me throughout my entire career. So when I got to Monterrey, it was just Bobby all over again, telling me start from the beginning, learn as much as you can about your guy. And that's how we started, and just getting information from witnesses here and there to try to actually build a case, just like in the United States. We had no idea that we were going to be attacked by grenades and shot at, so, but we were building our I would say a nest of information, so that we could get to that point eventually. And that's how you start with, hey, just what kind of car do they drive? Just basic stuff until you start getting more detailed stuff. And it's like a little mountain. You just start building until you get to the top, right? So at the time we knew we weren't going to get Miguel Trevino overnight. So we had to, I would say an analogy is chop away at the tree little by little, and eventually we would get there. So basically that's it.
I always look at the the 1 hour procedural things on TV where they go from murder to solved in
right
very short order, and
that doesn't happen, man.
we all wish it was that easy. Now I understand why they do it. I mean, it's TV and all,
sure.
but
right.
So during your time and the DEA's going after the Zetas, there were, I mean, your book has a number of chilling, scary, however you want to define it, incidents. What was that like for you guys on kind of a day-to-day basis? Because at some point, I mean, you guys were their enemies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And they knew it as well as, it wasn't like they didn't know you existed.
The minute I stepped into that consulate in Monterrey, they knew who I was. Why? Because they have all the law enforcement officers on their payroll. I'm not going to say all, because there's some that aren't, but most of them are on the payroll. So the minute I got there, they knew who I was. They knew my name before I got there. So they knew all these things, and we know that they know. So it's just okay. It's just one of those games,
Right.
We have to deal with corruption in Mexico, just like many parts of the world, even in the U.S. So, I mean, we just dealt with it. And as far as the day-to-day thing, once the grenade attack happened, yeah, we were on high alert all the time. And the minute you walk out the door, you're looking over your shoulder and just making sure that you're not being followed and stuff like that. Those kind of tradecraft techniques that we had to use, which was, it wears on you after a while, but you just got to do it day in, day out, man. You got to do it, and you can't stop. So.
Did you have family there?
When I initially got to Monterrey, yes, I did. My wife and kids were there. Eventually, we had to move them out because it just got too dangerous. So yeah, and not only myself, but Monterrey became what's known in the State Department circles as an adults only post. So people that were going to report for duty in Monterrey could not take their kids. It was only adults. So a lot of families had to move out because of that. Yeah, there was some very trying times down there.
Yeah, I was gonna say that can't make it any easier,
right?
To be away from family,
right? Yeah, luckily for me, I was close to the border, so I could visit them quite often, more so than some of my other coworkers and counterparts. But yeah, it was still hard. I mean, we couldn't get away from the work sometimes, and you had to stay. So
Yeah. So we talked about maybe the tipping point for the Zetas with the bombing of the embassy and the murder of the 9 Sedania soldiers. Can you kind of talk us through that descent, which didn't happen overnight? One of the things I find interesting, just as an aside, and I've talked a lot about the different organizations and specifically about the Zetas on some other podcasts or episodes here, but I find looking at the management structure or the leadership structure and how some groups are able to survive better than others. And one of the things that I find interesting is that you had this military styled organization that in some respects had, a cascade of leadership changes, in what I, at least an outsider, will look at as almost a non-military like way. So I'm just wondering if you can kind of help us understand kind of how this group goes from being very big and very, very bad to, almost non-existent in a relatively speaking, not a tremendously long period of time.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, we said we're going to start chipping away at the tree. So you have Trevino at the top of the chain. And like I said also earlier, the Zetas operated like a corporation. So they would have, in each major city of Mexico, they would have what's called a plaza boss. So in Monterrey, they had a plaza boss. And that was El Canicon, the one who threw the grenade. And after we went after him, they put somebody else. And then we got him. And it came to the point where the Zetas were like, hey, man, nobody wants to be in charge of Monterrey anymore because everybody's getting taken out. So as we start either arresting or these guys get killed in a shootout, these plaza bosses, the quality of leadership deteriorates. I mean, you don't have the former special forces guy. You got some guy that was leading a gang, Colonia Independencia down the street. So the quality of leadership is just going down, and that's what started to happen with these guys. They couldn't find any more special forces guys to come and join them. So now what do? They're just getting guys off the street, guys that think they're bad, or part of a gang or something like that. But it's not the same. It's not the same as being a special forces guy. Nothing to do with it. There's no comparison. So
right.
That's what we started seeing results and seeing, hey, we're being effective, man. We just got to keep the pressure going, and keep taking out these plaza bosses, whether it's in Monterrey or Guadalupe or Escobedo or wherever they may be, right? So that was the strategy that we had. Let's start taking out their structure, their leadership structure, the structure that Trevino had in place in Monterrey. So eventually we'll be able to get to him, or we'll get enough intelligence from those guys to be able to get to him. So that was a strategy that we employed, and it was pretty effective.
Hasn't the government, the U.S. government, kind of recently announced that they're turning back to more of a focus on the plaza bosses?
I haven't seen that, but it's a strategy that they really need to employ. I really, since
for a while, didn't they go more for, if you chop off the head of the snake, the snake will die? But that hasn't proven overly successful. We can go back to El Chapo. So I thought, but anyways, I find it interesting that was the strategy you guys used.
Yeah, there's logic in both strategies. So it's like El Chapo, you take out the head, well, what happens? The quality of leadership goes down. The guys that are in charge now, they don't compare to what El Chapo was. They don't have the same knowledge, the same institutional knowledge about the area or whatever, and the context, and it's just not the same. So that's where you see some results. So I see, some logic in both strategies.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of opinion, I guess.
And then did Zetas run into a problem too that, once there's chinks in the armor, so to speak, you got plenty of other groups that are more than happy to,
Right.
To take their own shots at them.
Right. So towards the end, when I talk about the end, I'm talking about the end of my time in Monterrey, because I left in 2015. Trevino was captured in 2013, but by the time he was captured, he had Sedena after him, he had Semar, the Marines, the federal police, he had the Gulf Cartel after him, he had the Sinaloa Cartel after him, he had DEA after him, FBI, everybody was after him. Even his own guys.
He wasn't sleeping easy any night.
Right, he was not. Even his own guys, they felt that he had betrayed Heriberto Lascano, so there was some kind of fracture between themselves, and he had, and the end of my book, I think the last chapter, I call it Nowhere to Run, and he had nowhere to run anymore. He was sleeping in the middle of these rural ranch lands in Mexico, and just sleeping on the dirt when he had all these millions of dollars at his disposal, and he just couldn't, because he had nowhere to run. Everybody was after him. Everybody.
Yeah. So then you ended your time in Monterrey in 2015, and then right. Where'd you go from there?
I retired from there.
Okay.
Yeah, and started enjoying, retirement life, and I started writing the book around 2017. So it took me a long time. I'm asked many, many times, how come it took you so long? Well, some of these things were just hard to write, and there's a chapter in there where I talk about the U.S. consulate bodyguards. That chapter was very difficult for me to write. Those guys were very good friends of mine, and one of the things that you'll see in the book, and for the listeners out there, there's a lot of loss. We suffered a lot of loss, not just on their side, but us too. We had a lot of friends that were killed in this conflict. So it took me a long time, because it's just like reliving everything all over again, man. So yeah, it took me quite a while to write it, and I wanted it to be good. I wanted it to be accurate, and I wanted to convey what we felt at the time, what we were going through. So I hope that came across.
It definitely did, and I want to say this very carefully, because there is no comparison. So I'm not making the comparison at all, but when I wrote about the Camarena case, we had a client who died in prison for a crime that I don't think he committed. Others can disagree. And, I worked for a decade on that case and couldn't clear his name.
Yeah.
And again, not making the comparison to the losses you had, but I can understand how much you want to get the story out, and yet how hard it is to tell the story.
Right.
And I really appreciate what came out, because again, from my perspective, I felt more invested in the story the way you've presented it than in most any other book I've read on this topic. So I say that to you as a compliment to you, and I say that to the readers.
Yes.
Let me put it this way, folks. If you're listening to this podcast, you already have an interest in this subject, just buy the damn book, because it's really good.
Well, I appreciate that. Yes.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I wanted to show in the book, and you see these movies and some of the other books that are on the same topic, but I didn't want to just show all the shooting and killing and this and that. I also wanted to show some of the human side of what we go through, and also some of the beauty that is in Mexico. I talk sometimes about some of the locations like Puerto Vallarta and the food. It's just there's nothing like it. I mean, I wanted to show those parts too, and I hope that came across as well. But it's a shame that Mexico's going through this, because it's a beautiful country. I really enjoyed my time there when I could spend it. Have some quality time in places where you can relax, and there's many of them. And I wanted to convey that as well in the book. It's not all about beheadings and killings and this and that. There's some really, really beautiful places in Mexico to visit.
And I did think that came out, and I think that the idea that the continuing impacts of the cartels and the cartel wars, going all the way back to Camarena and even earlier, it's unfortunate that so many Americans, when you think of Mexico, you either think of a beach in Cancun, a nightclub in Cabo, or cartels. And as you say, I go to Guadalajara a fair amount, and there's amazing art and architecture and hundreds of other places in Mexico. And I think you're right that gets ignored more than it should.
It really does. It really does. I used to love going to Mexico City. I mean, Mexico City is, wow. It's one of the most amazing cities in the world. I mean, I love it.
I have lots of little areas, pockets of interest, but I love history, and I love the Aztecs and the Mayans and all of that. And, so that whole area from Mexico City all the way down through Central America is just fascinating to me. And again, even like in Chiapas has a lot of really great, interesting archaeological significance. And I wouldn't never go there.
Well, see, and that's one of the things that pisses me off, because Mexico does have all these things to offer, and you really can't go and enjoy it because these guys don't let you.
Right.
You're risking your life by going to Chiapas and wanting to see some of these fascinating things, and you can't because of these guys, and that angers me, and it angers a lot of people in Mexico too, because they, in the past, they enjoyed these things and they enjoyed these trips, and now you can, but you just have to measure the risk that you're taking. So,
right. Even when I go to Guadalajara, I have a guide. I have a local guy who knows everybody. I've got emergency contacts and everything, and it's too bad. Before I let you go, and I so appreciate your time, and I could spend a lot of time going through details of the book, but I want people to read it for themselves. But not book related. If you sit back in your chair and you think, okay, we're a month and a half into Scheinbaum's administration, we got the Trump administration coming in. If you were just to prognosticate, where do you think things go in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years vis-a-vis the U.S., Mexico, and the cartels?
Well, I think something's going to come to a head very soon. As soon as President Trump takes office, something's got to break, because I totally agree with what Trump has said. It's a strategy. You got to take these guys on, and that was President Calderon's strategy when we were down there in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And once Calderon left office, Peña Nieto came in, and he didn't pursue the same path that Calderon did, and he kind of started scaling it down. And then when AMLO came in, well, forget it. It was just out the window. It seemed like everything we worked to get to a certain level, was just gone with AMLO now. And now she's pretty much his puppet. So I'm I'm pretty interested in seeing what's going to happen with this administration and see how Trump can do something to change things over there.
I will note I've seen a couple of articles where Scheinbaum has almost refused to use the term "hugs not guns."
She has, but she also is in denial about calling them terrorists,
right?
Or designating the cartels as terrorists. She doesn't want to do it. At some point, she's going to have to, or something's going to break. Something's going to happen. Something's going to come to a head. So I'm interested. I got my popcorn ready, man.
Well, you've got a great vantage point because you're going to understand what's going on better than most of us. And maybe I'll have you back and we can talk about things when stuff starts to happen in the new year. Because I got to believe that it's not going to be long before we have deportations and actions against the cartels. Right. It may not be the beginning of January, but it's not going to be next November, I don't think.
No, I think it's going to be sooner rather than later. And you know what? Yeah. Just before we go, a lot of these cartels, they send people over here to operate here in major cities in the United States. So yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see how things shape up. So
yeah, and then if you're talking about the deportations, do they find those people, or do they get kind of the low hanging fruit in the strawberry fields and stuff? And how's that going to play out? So lots of interesting things. Leo, I've talked to you before. I hope to talk to you again. Thank you for everything. It's a great book. And we really appreciate you doing that and appreciate you coming on.
Well, it's an honor to be here, Jack. Thank you. I'd love to be back.
All right, folks. That is Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena for this week. I'll talk to you next week. Look for this both on the podcast, and if you want to see how good looking Leo is, check out YouTube, because I'll have it up on YouTube in a couple of days. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Leo.
Thanks.
Take care.